I think this has some legs to it.
And obviously, the challenge for us in Arizona is let's grow in a responsible, common sense manner with no rolling blackouts.
When the sun goes down or the wind doesn't blow, entire classes of assets are no longer there. State of the world right now where reserve margins are shrinking, we should actually be increasing reserve margins.
The world has actually decided that physics matter again. And
there's this myth going around that somehow regulated entities wouldn't face these challenges.
We cannot forget that reliability is job one.
We know what the plan is, and now is time to actually get that done, pass it into law, and allow Americans to do what we do best.
During this series, we brought together perspectives from across the industry, from analysts to regional transmission operators to competitive power generators and more. They've shared how they see load growth as being not just another reliability challenge to be faced, but an opportunity for more investment, for a new frontier of policy and advocacy, and for more build-out of the resources that are needed to keep the grid running while technology forges ahead.
Hi, this is Francis, one of EPSA's podcast producers. Just a quick note before we get started. We went into this series with the idea of doing 4 episodes, but we got so much more good content than we expected, so we're going to do a final bonus episode of this series, releasing a week from when this episode comes out, so stay tuned for our bonus episode out on September 5th. In this episode, we wanted to get a sense of how policymakers are approaching the issue. We'll hear from Congressman August Pfluger, who represents the Texas 11th District, and Leah Marquez Peterson, Commissioner at the Arizona Corporation Commission. In part 2 of this episode, we'll be talking to more of our member company representatives for insights on what policies and market frameworks will enable cost-effective growth. Kurt Morgan, CEO of Alpha Generation, Thad Hill, CEO of Calpine and Chairman of EPSA's Board of Directors, and Margie Rosenbluth Phillips, Senior Vice President of Wholesale Market Policy at LS Power, are all weighing in. And now, back to Todd.
Congressman August Pfluger, representing the 11th District of Texas, brings us unique insight into the largest state's energy policy priorities. He shares his perspective on what policies have contributed to bring about load growth and why the focus in energy policy needs to be unleashing American innovation, permitting reform, and maintaining reliable power supply through dispatchable resources. Let's hear from Congressman Pfluger. Congressman, I can't thank you enough for joining us today, and I'm going to jump right into it with you. In June, the House Energy and Commerce Committee held a hearing on projected increases in demand, specifically due to demand from AI, but also it addressed a number of other issues of why demand is going to increase, not only in Texas, but nationwide. And those included AI, but also electrification and reshoring of manufacturing, et cetera, the CHIPS Act, decarbonization. As you look at that from your seat in Congress, what is the outlook that you see about policy goals and trends, and how do you see them continuing, and how are we going to try to meet the moment on these multiple challenges that are happening at the same time?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's something that I'm passionate about. And I think you're right. Demand is going to increase. And it's not just by a couple of percentage points. I mean, most of the conservative outlooks by economists and other experts throughout the country are that demand is going to increase by up to 50, maybe even more % in the next couple of years, 10 years or so. And that is due and driven by AI centers and population increase. And it's, hopefully driven by additional manufacturing that we're doing here in the United States and nearshoring manufacturing that has traditionally been in places like China and other countries around the world that we're now competing with. But every single provider of electricity will tell you they are concerned and that the number one biggest threat to having the supply to meet that demand is to have good policy that has a level playing field, that incentivizes the types of energy, the primary sources that actually work, that are what I call best of the above.
As you're looking at these big challenges, there are clearly a number of significant hurdles. I think you've mentioned a couple, but regulatory challenges, permitting delays, policy choices. Which one are you focused on, or which ones are you focused on as the biggest ones that need attention in order to deliver the outcomes that you want to see?
Well, as one of the original authors of HR 1, I believe in unleashing American energy. I believe in unleashing American innovation. I believe in helping get us to a point where step one, I believe, is to cut the permitting timeline, to do away with the frivolous lawsuits. We were able to get some pretty significant NEPA reforms in early 2023. That was step one, where we cut the timeline, where an environmental analysis and an impact statement take 1 and 2 years respectively. But now it's time to stop these frivolous lawsuits that just seem to go on and on and on, and they cause indefinite delays. So permitting reform to me is cross-cutting. Yes, it impacts the energy industry, probably disproportionately so, but it also impacts the ability to build roads and bridges and other infrastructure throughout the United States. If we want to compete with the Chinese Communist Party, we have to get permitting correct.
As you look at that permitting challenge, do you think that that creates unique concerns, or do you feel like we can actually get to a permitting outcome that's going to deliver the much needed infrastructure? And I'm glad you broadened it. I mean, energy, yes, but it is a broader set of issues. Do you think we can get there from here?
Well, I do think we can get there. And I think that's Republicans have a plan for that. We've had a plan. I mean, we only had the majority of the House in the last 2 years, and yet we were still able to achieve NEPA reform. So yes, we know, I think, what the plan is. And now, as we're hopeful to get President Trump reelected, I think his agenda will include unleashing American energy, unleashing American innovation, nearshoring the manufacturing, and permitting is going to be a massive part of that. So yes, we know what the plan is, and now is time to actually get that done, pass it into law, and allow Americans to do what we do best.
Talk to me a little bit about how you view the state of American energy and specifically to this audience, electricity production. Do you think we're on the right track as a country, or are we moving in the wrong direction? Or do you think that there's obviously room for improvement? I think we've already established that in the first couple of questions, but do you think we're trending in a way that is positive and we're going to be able to meet the moment? Because certainly that's our ambition, but we are responsive to the policies that are passed at the federal and state level. I'm curious how you see that.
I'll be specific. There is no scenario in this world where fossil fuels are going to play less of a role in the next 20 to 30 years. Renewables may play a bigger role, and quite frankly, that's great. But there's no scenario where they don't play a significant role in the production as the primary source with natural gas of electricity. So if you establish that baseline and you know that natural gas is going to continue to be a primary driver of electricity, then we should be producing that that natural gas here to benefit our own grid, to benefit Americans, to benefit the jobs that we have here. Secondly, there has been pushback around the world on using and harnessing nuclear energy, specifically in Western Europe. I think if there's one area of bipartisan agreement, it is that nuclear is going to play a large role. We've been pushing for that, and it's the same thing as natural gas because you have a reliable source of energy that is dispatchable in the ability to provide electricity. It's baseload capable. That's the important thing. There's many different attributes of looking at this energy puzzle. You want it to be affordable. You want it to be reliable. You want it to be as environmentally friendly as possible. You want it to be geopolitically significant and strategically significant. When you put all those things together, you can't afford to drop any of those balls. That's why natural gas, I think LNG specifically, is such an important fuel. When people use the word transition, we're in an energy transition. Well, I don't believe that. I believe we're in an energy expansion. And we're going to have new sources of power to provide the electricity. But of those sources, we know that nuclear and LNG are two of the very best, and we cannot afford to hamper the production of either of them.
We couldn't agree with you more on the energy expansion point. We agree wholeheartedly. I know that you're nearing only the end of your second term in Congress, but you're actively involved in the Republican Study Committee's House Energy Action Team. And I'm curious what your takeaways are from your time as the chairman of HEAT, and where maybe HEAT's already done some work and where you think there may be some opportunities for more work to be done to deliver some good policy outcomes.
Well, it's been an honor to lead the House Energy Action Team, the HEAT team, to be the chairman of this organization. We've had many, many meetings where leading CEOs throughout the industry and throughout the energy industry have been able to come and talk with us to discuss important issues. So I think one of the most important things we've done is we've given members of Congress a real voice when it comes to energy, a discussion and a forum to come together and talk about the finer points, which I believe helped in the production of H.R. 1. It helped in authoring House Resolution 1, the Lowering Energy Costs for All Americans Act that we passed earlier. And by the way, it was bipartisan. But just to give you a couple of the people that we've invited that have spoken to the HEAT team, Vicki Hollub, the CEO of Occidental, Jim Burke, the CEO of Vistra. We've had Harold Hamm, we've had Mike Summers, Jack Fusco, the CEO of Cheniere, Dan Broylette, the former Secretary of Energy, Danny Rice, the CEO of Net Power, Jim Teague, Senator Capito, Travis Stice, and so many others, Ray Perryman, a renowned economist. We've talked about the production of hydrocarbons. We've talked about the production of nuclear energy. We've talked about renewable energy. We've talked about how it interacts with the grid, what it does for us economically and geopolitically. And I'm very proud of the meetings that we've held. And I think that has specifically led and contributed to the formation of really important legislation like H.R. 1.
I think that's great. And that's the kind of leadership that I think will drive policies going forward. So we appreciate your work and look forward to what else you may have in store. I want to wrap up with at least one question for you about the EPA regs that have come out recently and the fact that they have the potential to impact reliability. We filed comments on those. I know you've been very clear about where you stand on those. I'm curious if you anticipate that the Energy and Commerce Committee might engage with the FERC commissioners and the commission more broadly to a greater extent going forward, because FERC, of course, is responsible for regulating wholesale power markets and ensuring reliability. And we wonder sometimes how closely they're working with EPA to better understand the impacts of rulemakings. And I'm curious if that's an area of interest to the committee, or if that's something that we'll see more discussion or hearings around that issue specifically.
It certainly is an area of concern, an area that the committee is going to interact with. And let me just put it in kind of broad comments here. I believe that American trust of government institutions is at a low point. When you talk about these agencies, the reason that I say that is because these agencies should be working to come up with solutions that attain all of the objectives, that come up with solutions that empower Americans and American companies to compete and to be as successful as possible. Yes, we want clean water. Yes, we want clean air. Yes, we want to continue to take care of the environment. And I think that once we get back to understanding that even the companies in this industry that participate in it, they want the same thing. They're not asking for no regulation. What they're asking for is for the government to come and sit down with them and have an adult conversation about the types of regulations that we have. That has not existed, and it has led to distrust, which I think has led to bad policies. We recently invited EPA Region 6 Director Dr. Earthia Nance, to come to Midland, Texas. And I was very proud when she came out that we were able to show her what private industry and companies in the Permian are doing to reduce the emissions of methane specifically. She was shocked to the level and the degree that these companies go to be responsible actors. And they're not doing it because the government is mandating it. They're doing it because they believe, number one, it's the right thing to do. And number two, it matches their economic model from being an American company so they can compete here and abroad. That's the kind of thing that our government agencies should be doing. So yes, we are absolutely, as a committee, going to be engaging with FERC, engaging with EPA, engaging with the Department of Energy, and we're going to be doing oversight in order to get back into balance so that they're not the ones writing the rules that have the full force and effect of law, but it's Congress that writes those laws and they can enforce them, and that we do so in a harmonious way, because right now it's completely out of balance.
Congressman, I can't thank you enough for taking a few minutes to visit with us today. I think this is extremely helpful, and it is a really critical issue that's going to impact Americans going forward now and over the next several decades. So thanks very much for your time.
Well, thank you. And I couldn't think of a more important topic than delivering electricity at affordable rates to all Americans. In order to compete both here and abroad, we have to do that. We have to continue to lead on that. And I appreciate what your organization does to do that every single day.
Moving west, Leah Marquez Peterson, a commissioner at the Arizona Corporation Commission, joins us to talk about what energy resources her state brings to the table, top energy priorities, and how, as one of the top data center states, they're addressing load growth, both challenges and opportunities. Here's Commissioner Marquez Peterson.
You know, Arizona is in an interesting position. We are seeing incredible growth. We're one of the fastest growing states in the country. And we have our largest utility, Arizona Public Service, APS, talking about a 40% energy demand by 2031 that needs to be met. So we are seeing a lot of growth, a lot of demand for resources. Some of the top energy priorities we have certainly is providing reliable energy at the most affordable rates.
Yep.
That's the priority for all of the commissioners that are currently serving. We also are facing a lot of transmission needs across the entire West, but certainly in Arizona, that's a longer term game. So we're knee deep in trying to figure out how we tackle that, but really is response to a lot of the energy demand coming to the state.
So, if from an outsider's perspective, Arizona looks especially strong in renewable energy. Obviously, the desert Southwest has a lot of solar capability and some other things, but how is that fitting in with your state's electrification and decarbonization goals? For those that may not be familiar, can you kind of walk us through where Arizona is on that spectrum? Because, of course, the 50 states are all a little bit different, and so it's always helpful to have some context.
No, absolutely. So I was actually appointed to my commission in 2019, and then since elected to the seat, we're one of those states that
Yeah.
elects our commissioners. But when I was appointed, I kind of started while the commission was mid-debate on whether we had clean energy mandates in the state of Arizona. And ultimately, after a lot of debate and discussion, a lot of special interest groups weighing in, we did not create a mandate for energy, as any type, certain type of energy in the state of Arizona, and instead have been very responsive to kind of the market. We have so many commercial, industrial companies coming to the state. We have a lot of data centers that want to join us in the state, and they all have different zero carbon rules or goals that they've set, or their own clean energy goals. So our utilities have done a great job at responding to that. Each utility has set their own voluntary clean energy goals, usually zero carbon by 2050. And so we're supportive of those voluntary goals. But again, with that priority that the number one issue should really be energy reliability at the most affordable cost.
That sounds an awful lot like EPSA messaging. I would almost think you were singing from our hymnal. So we're always happy to hear commissioners who take that philosophy, of course. You've already mentioned it now, and of course, that's the reason that we're doing this podcast is the rising power demand, and it's fluctuating by region, but virtually every region of the country is seeing some degree of load growth, but some areas are seeing a substantial amount of load growth. And you've already mentioned kind of some of the projections in Arizona, which are pretty staggering considering where we have been. And AI and data centers are driving some of that, but reshoring of manufacturing are also some of the lead drivers of this. To what degree are you viewing it in Arizona as a concern or an opportunity? And what are the challenges that you see that it poses? And how's the Arizona Corporation Commission thinking about addressing these issues?
I think we certainly see it as an opportunity, but also a challenge. I mean, 40% growth over the next 7 years is pretty daunting.
Yeah, that's huge.
If people aren't familiar with APS, they're predominantly the Phoenix urban area of our state, which is where the majority of our population is. And that's, if you think it took 120 years for APS to get to this point in terms of infrastructure, now we're going to grow by over 40% in the next 7 years. We are doing a lot of things to prepare for that in terms of, we work with a line siting committee. I know not every commission does so, but they go through the different interconnection proposals that come from third-party developers and our utilities, and we've done a lot of streamlining of that process.
Okay.
Couple of years ago, we had quite a queue, quite a line, and it was taking quite a bit of time for folks to come through that system. And we've made some great improvements. I continuously ask third-party developers, how's it going? What are you hearing? How do we compare to other states? And I'm hearing very positive comments. So that's good. But we are also embracing research. You know, we're looking at potentially resources behind the meter. We're a big proponent, or I certainly am, on small modular nuclear reactors. What's that future? How do we prepare permitting reform or whatever it may look like at the county level and even at the state level throughout Arizona? A lot of new technology related to batteries and transmission enhancements. So there are a lot of things we're looking at. And obviously the challenge for us in Arizona is let's grow in a responsible, common sense manner with no rolling blackouts. So we need to grow smartly in a practical manner without an overdependence on variable generation, which could create some real challenges for us, especially in the heat of summer. We're in the hot time right now, and it's incredibly important that we do not have blackouts because it's life or death in Arizona if people don't have electricity. We need our air conditioning. So we're really focused on being, I think, practical and common sense about how we approach this in our state.
And that makes an awful lot of sense, certainly as an outsider who's looking in. I know that EPRI has identified Arizona as being the number 6 state on the list of the 15 states they've identified where data center growth is concentrated. How's that affecting Arizona specifically? I mean, we hear about Northern Virginia, and there's some other states, of course, that are experiencing some of this. And I think sometimes Arizona is either not thought of or is overlooked a bit. So given your seat and the responsibility you have for that, common sense approach, how is this affecting you and Arizona specifically?
Yeah, I'm assuming that our number on that list is really dependent on our growth, population growth,
Sure.
also our proximity to California, which is still the largest state, certainly on the West Coast.
Right.
So a lot of folks wanting to have conversations. And when I'm at conferences, when I'm able to Zoom with various companies, we're having a lot of conversations from data centers and others that want to talk about that incredible growth that we're seeing. We're
Mhm.
also having a lot of conversations with our utilities, and the what we're saying is we're certainly open to this opportunity. We need to figure this out together, though. Whether that's in front of the meter or behind the meter is really key. And
Mhm.
I spoke about that earlier, use of technology in other ways. As an elected commissioner, though, my priority are the existing Arizona ratepayers. We need to
Sure.
take care of our constituents, our businesses that are in place. I do hear concerns from folks around the state in terms of incredible growth, especially in Maricopa County, which is where Phoenix is located. So, keeping mindful of that while we make sure we grow it in a smart way. Another thing I think we need to figure out with the data center industry is really how they can manage their load during peak times.
Hmm.
I hear that that's not realistic. They tell me we need 24/7 power all the time,
Right.
no blips. It impacts our technology, but I think we need to innovate in the data center space and really rethink how they're structured and how they're, in essence, selling themselves to the various states that they're talking to.
How are you trying to think about navigating through the balance between new investment, affordability, and of course reliability, which is paramount? And we would agree with you 100% on that. That feels like a pretty daunting task. How are you navigating that?
Right. We're really working through our integrated resource planning process, IRPs.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the public is not familiar with that process, but we do a lot of public speaking. I certainly do in my state to chambers and rotaries and different groups and explain that they can go on our utilities websites and look at their 15-year outlook.
Mm-hmm.
That's not done in a vacuum. It's certainly done in a space where there's stakeholders giving input. In fact, we require that. And then they're looking at their forecasted load. And really the key to that is that forecast, right? What are they determining those economic assumptions around commercial investment, population growth, data center growth? I mean, all of that is there. And those IRPs are being updated every other year and presented to us. We're actually hearing updates from our largest utilities July 31st, so just in a little bit. But I think that's how we're tackling it, is really keeping on top of the IRPs. We in Arizona hold summer preparedness meetings because obviously that's our major peak time. So I think that plays into it. So continued conversations with our utilities, talking about that forecast, and also the streamlining of the line siting efforts. I mentioned that earlier, but that's vitally important. If we need this energy rapidly, like we're hearing, we need to ensure that we don't have bottlenecks in the process. So I mean, from my perspective to yours, if you have members that are seeing any issues, they should certainly reach out to the commission. But we feel like we've really been able to streamline and work with the line siting members to make some real improvements.
So, what are you hearing about how other states and regulators are thinking about some of these issues? And are there commonalities that we ought to be looking at? Or do we just utilize the regional differences to try to solve some of these situations? I mean, I feel like there's unique situations in each region. So, I'm curious what you're hearing and how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, every state is tackling this differently, as you know. Growth discussions are different state by state. We are seeing a lot of growth in Arizona. So certainly whether it's residential or commercial or data center, we're very focused on that. So I don't hear the same focus from other states. I also think that they have some bigger challenges to face when they have clean energy mandates by a certain year. A certain percentage, they're laser focused on that because whether that's, I mean, I kind of think sometimes that's an unnatural timeline, right? I don't know how much the legislature, whoever set that particular goal, the analysis they did for their state resources, but they've really got to figure that out. And we don't have that same concern. We haven't put that mandate in place. So I think I hear a lot more about the clean energy mandates, even the mandate to participate in a regional transmission organization or an RTO.
Yep.
A lot of those mandates are certainly top of mind for other states and other commissions.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. As you look at how you're going to procure the additional generating resources that might be needed and are mindful of the cost implications, I know you mentioned the IRP process. Are there other tools, competitive procurement, or other things that are utilized in Arizona, or is that not something you're thinking about? I'm asking for my own benefit, I suppose, as well as the listeners. I'm not really sure kind of all the tools that are available to Arizona to try and meet this demand and do so most cost effectively.
Yeah, we utilize all source RFPs for our
Okay.
largest utilities, and it's been a great process. APS, our largest utility, had a 2023 RFP for 1,000 megawatts. About 700 megawatts of that came from, or is likely coming from renewables, solar and battery.
Okay.
So you see a lot of competitive projects being bid into those RFPs. So if your members are looking for projects to bid, I'd certainly look towards APS for their incredible growth. SRP, who we don't regulate, Salt River Project, also has numerous all-source RFPs out. And Tucson Electric Power, our third largest utility, is probably a little more steady in growth. They're not based in the Phoenix area. They're further south in Tucson, and they're also working through all-source RFPs. So we're really open for business.
That sounds like a great opportunity and something that people should be keeping an eye on. Are there tools? You've already mentioned how you've done some streamlining of the process, which sounds really favorable, and not every state, I think, has done that. So maybe there's some lessons to be learned from Arizona there. But are there other things that you think are still outstanding that you'd like to see improved to help support reliable power to meet this growing demand? Are there other things that maybe we ought to be thinking about? Maybe Arizona's already done them, and these are things for people to think about and replicate, or are there still things that you think need to be done to continue to meet the moment?
Well, I think we can continuously improve the process, right? So we've
Sure.
certainly taken a number of steps, but there are some steps. We are constitutionally created, I guess I should explain, from the commission. So there's a lot we can do on our own. There are items, though, we need to look to our state legislators to make some updates or changes potentially. So we talk to them frequently about the importance of the line siting process and things that they could potentially make a change in that would make it easier. A lot of the conversation, as your members know, when you are starting a new development, starts actually at planning and zoning, which is appointed by a county, right? So in Arizona, a county board of supervisors are the folks that appoint those commissioners at the planning and zoning level. We've seen some activity recently with counties really stepping out of moratoriums on different types of resources. So I think we need to do more about educating folks about how we're interconnected and the impact to the grid. But ultimately, it's local. Nobody wants certain types of, whether it's transmission or natural gas peaker or utility scale solar, or people don't want that in their backyards in many cases. So I think as an industry, we need to educate more. We need to be in front of these issues, solicit public comment, not be afraid of being out there with the project and getting feedback, because if not, it's going to come back to bite us in the future as we see this incredible growth and we get pushback from constituents or voters or ratepayers.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. And I know it seems that is landing with some developers that they now recognize the importance of being out in front of the issues. As my last question, if you had the opportunity to provide 2 or 3 pieces of key advice to either the data centers or the load centers, the manufacturers that are coming, what are some things you would offer for them? Or what are some things that you would offer to your fellow regulators or really to the public as they look at how we're all going to try to navigate through this process together?
Right. So I think specific to the data centers and maybe other utilities and commissioners across the nation, really continuing conversations. I think we need to sit in spaces where we can be innovative, where we can look at the competitive nature of growth. Even if you think of a particular data center, whatever company it may be, they are, in our case, a big box trying to plant themselves in the desert where they use a lot of water and they're going to use a lot of energy. So they're really impacting our demand and they don't employ very many people. I mean, so as you just design it or define it, it's not as attractive as others may seem. So how do we rethink how data centers are created or structured? What kind of energy resource can serve them? We're all very excited about small modular nuclear reactors. Someday they're not cost effective now. So I'm being told 10, 15 years out. Well, perhaps, tech companies and others that are leading these data center asks can move that needle a little faster. And maybe it's in a different way that serves not just the data center, but the region or the state overall. I just think we need to have maybe some more conversations that are a little more cutting edge or innovative and look at not how things had been done in the past, but how we need to change things for the future.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energy Rush. We thought it only fitting to wrap our series with some of the competitive power suppliers we represent: Alpha Generation, Calpine, and Ellis Power. Stay tuned for the second part of episode 4 coming next week, where Kurt Morgan, CEO of Alpha Generation, Thad Hill, CEO of Calpine, and Margie Rosenbluth Phillips, Senior Vice President of Wholesale Market Policy at Ellis Power, share their perspectives. Don't forget to check out our regular podcast, Energy Solutions, featuring the voices and stories behind a changing electric grid.
Subscribe, follow, leave a rating, and comment on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Pandora. And follow us on X at EPSA News, Threads at Electric Power Supply, and LinkedIn for more news and updates from America's competitive power suppliers. The music in this episode was written and produced by Let Me Hold That, Ltd.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, which bring about 150,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. The music in this episode is written, produced, and performed by Let Me Hold That, Ltd. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.